The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Zebra Technologies DevTalk webinar. My name is Dan Qualiana, Head of Developer Relations. I'd like to welcome you to today's talk. We have a really special presentation today from Zebra's software architect, Darryn Campbell, and one of our Zebra partners, Couchbase. We have Greeley, one of their developer advocates, and Darryn and Hod are going to be walking through a use case utilizing Zebra devices to scan and access a lot of the information from that scanned content through database and talk about how we manage that effectively. So I'm really excited about this talk. Before we kick it off, though, I did want to just announce a few things. So first off, we will be recording this session, and we will have the slides and the code of the app that Hod's going to be walking through posted to the Zebra developer portal. So you can find that at developer.zebra.com, and there will be a posting for this DevTalk webinar. And if you do have a question throughout this talk, please type that into the question window, and we will get to those questions at the end of the presentation. Lastly, as you can see on the slide here, Zebra has set the dates and the locations for our 4 App Forum conferences for 2019. We will not be having App Forums in 2018. We have shifted to an every other year schedule. So please mark these dates off, and we would love to see you there. We're going to have a lot of Zebra's top partners presenting. We'll have Zebra executives and product leaders giving you the chance to really speak to a lot of industry experts on what's going on in enterprise software. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Darryn Campbell. Thanks, Darryn.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so we're going to be talking over synchronizing local data storage with Couchbase on Zebra devices. So I'm Darryn, I'm one of the software architects here at Zebra. Let's just go to the agenda here. So I'll just start off. I know we'll have a number of people on the webinar who are not as familiar with Zebra technologies, since we've obviously been promoting this through Couchbase channels as well. So I will just have a brief introduction of what Zebra are, who we are, what we do, and some of our development techniques. But the bulk of this presentation will be given over to Couchbase and particularly the demo of the sample app that we've put together. So just very briefly then, who we are. So we are a hardware manufacturer. We make mobile devices running Android, and you can see a number of them on the screen there. These are our rugged enterprise devices. We also have a wide variety of mobile and desktop printers supporting various media, as well as dedicated barcode scanners as well. So for the audience of this presentation, we're just looking at our ruggedized enterprise device portfolio. If you're not familiar with these devices, you may have come across them most frequently if you've ever done personal shopping in a supermarket. All those racks of devices at the front where you can take one and scan your card, and then you scan your shopping as you go around. They tend to be our Zebra devices. Also, when you have package deliveries come to the door and you have to sign your name, they also tend to be one of our devices. You'll notice that over the past recent few years, those devices have become better. No longer are you trying to sign your signature with a broken pen and it doesn't appear anything like what you've written, because now they have more powerful chips in. They're running Android, and in a number of cases they have capacitive touchscreens as well. So we've really seen an advance in the capabilities of ruggedized devices compared to where they were 5-7 years ago, even like 1 or 2 years ago. To be honest, they're a lot more closer to what consumers expect, and so we have a number of Android developers who easily transition between consumer development and enterprise development. We exist in a number of verticals. So in the retail, the lady's also using one of our RFID scanners there in conjunction with a mobile device. Transport and logistics, I mentioned, in package delivery. A large footprint in manufacturing. These are the really heavy-duty devices used in warehouses, and also we have a large presence in healthcare as well, especially in our printer ranges and our mobile devices. Often I'll get pictures sent to me from my friends if they ever get into hospital, and they always have like a little zebra logo on their barcode they have around their wrist, and they think I'd be interested in seeing that. Obviously, I'm more concerned with how they're feeling, but no, never mind. It's nice that they're getting in touch with me. So how would you go about developing an application for a Zebra Android device? So most of our developers are just trying to interface with the barcode scanner. I'd say that's probably about 90% of use cases. They're trying to get data in as a result of scanning barcodes. We do support other data capture technologies. Like I say, there's RFID. We have like optical character recognition, optical mark recognition, but 95% just trying to scan some barcodes. We have a native SDK. It's what we call the EMDK. We support Android and Xamarin. This is for your native development. We also have a hybrid development SDK. We call it Enterprise Browser. It is more than just a JavaScript SDK. It kind of wraps the WebView component and also enables lockdown of the operating system and not runtime configuration, but it's very configurable in what you can do with the Enterprise Browser application. So that covers JavaScript, Android, Xamarin developers. But what I'm talking about today is the technique which I suggested to the Couchbase team to use when they were putting together the sample app. So this is what you'll see in the sample app, and this is DataWedge. We call it our zero code solution. You're able to interface with the barcode scanner very quickly, easily. It uses an intent interface to gather data. Got a little bit more detail on the following screen here. And if you are familiar with DataWedge and you haven't looked at it since around 2016, I would encourage you to take another look at it. Whether the team has done an awful lot of work over the past year and a half to bring DataWedge up to a level of functionality where it is now on par with our native SDKs, but it has the additional advantages that you don't have to write any specific code, and also a common use case, you want to have different scanning capabilities in different apps or different activities of the same app. Very easy to do with DataWedge. You define a profile, and what this profile does, it encapsulates the input and the output. So the barcode scanner, for example, is the input. The output is you get an intent when you scan a barcode, an Android intent. This is industry standard technologies that we're using here, and all of the configurations, like you have which symbologies are being recognized and any configuration of those symbologies. You then associate that profile with an application activity or activities, and then everything else is automatic. When your activity comes to the foreground, the scanner is configured, and if you scan anything, you receive it in your application. If this is a little bit, if you've heard this before, I've got one more slide. Tried to make it a little bit more visually appealing. I experimented with some PowerPoint animations, so please bear with me at this point. So how DataWedge works on the device. So you have your device. This is a TC51, although almost all of our enterprise, in fact, all of our enterprise mobile devices come with DataWedge pre-installed. So you'll see the application on the device. You can launch it, and when you launch it, you're able to configure it on the device. We do have mass deployment options, but just for playing around with it, you can configure everything on the device here. So the DataWedge service is running at the Android level. It's not something you have to install after the fact. It's already there on your device. You have an application. So this is one of our sample applications available from techdocs.zebra.com, links at the end of this presentation. And the application, of course, sits at the top level. A barcode appears. A barcode has randomly appeared. If you then scan the barcode using the hardware button on the device, the beam comes out, and as a result of that, an intent is sent from the DataWedge service to your application, depending on how you've configured it. So I'm pretty sure HOD used the start activity configuration for the intent, but you can also choose to send a broadcast or start a service, however you've configured DataWedge to send that intent to your app. And then no surprises for guessing what happens if another barcode appears, which is then scanned. Zoom. Another intent is sent. So for every one barcode that's scanned, you get one intent. There are more complex ways of configuring this, like you can configure it to scan multiple barcodes or to do, like I say, OCR or mark recognition as well. But just at a simple level, one barcode for one intent. Separate from that, we have an API to control DataWedge, and this is what's been added over the last year and a half to bring the functionality of DataWedge up to that same level as our native SDKs. So we have a series of API commands, and you can send these commands through an intent. So they're just text commands, and you're sending it via a standard Android intent, nothing more complicated than that. And the API is available again on our techdocs site. So you might send the start scan command, and again, purely, we planned all this ahead of time, and this is the exact command which HOD has used in the sample app that we'll come to towards the end of the deck here. So if we send a start scan command, we no longer have to press the hardware button on the device. The scan will emit automatically, and again, we get the intent sent to our application. Now, some commands will involve a response from the DataWedge service. So, there's commands like create profile and switch profile. None of those require a response, but others, for example, the enumerate scanners, you'll want to receive a response back. So here we have like a response which is received as a broadcast at the moment. We may have additional ways of receiving responses in the future, but for now, you receive responses as a broadcast. So your broadcast receiver in your app, if you were to send enumerate scanners, and remember, you might have a Bluetooth scanner connected to this device. The camera might be possible to use as a scanning input source. So you might have three potential scanners on this device that you want to choose between. So you enumerate them, and you receive back an array of scanners, which detail associated with each of those scanners, like the name of it and whether it's Bluetooth or not, and so the capabilities as well. And so that's DataWedge, and that's the technique that has been used to capture data on our Zebra devices. And with that, I will hand over to HOD to continue. I'm just going to run over what Couchbase is and then launch into our demo app. So I just need to hand over, make presenter. Okay, HOD, please take it away.
There we go. All right. Thanks, Darren. So Couchbase, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Couchbase, we're one of the leading NoSQL databases companies in the world. So we're a software product company. We're not like a hosted database solution. We actually are building the database. Couchbase Data Platform includes Couchbase Server and Couchbase Mobile, and it's in use in its core technology in some of the most prominent firms in some major industries. As we see here, we're particularly proud of being in use by the top three. If you don't know what a GDS, that's the airline booking system companies like Sabre, top three credit reporting agencies, and some of the majority of the big e-commerce companies in the US, and a number of others. And why am I not advancing? Always something goes. So here, Couchbase, I just want to point out that Couchbase is a modern database, general purpose database. As you can see, we're in use across a variety of industries and use cases by a lot of names that I think you'll recognize here. Today, we're going to be touching on all the aspects of Couchbase Mobile in particular. So Couchbase Mobile is this stack, how we refer to the stack that I'm showing here. So I'm going to go through each of the parts. So to give a little bit more of the marketing blurb, and I promise not too much marketing style stuff, after this. Couchbase Mobile extends Couchbase Data Platform to the edge. So we're securely managing and syncing data from any cloud. So, with our software, you can install this across things like Amazon or any of the other cloud providers, and then syncing that data from the cloud to any mobile device. We have the three primary components here. We have at the database tier, we have Couchbase Server, which is our NoSQL database for managing and accessing data. In the middle tier, we have Sync Gateway, which is our secure gateway for managing and accessing data directly over the web. So this is, of course, largely sort of a security issue, whereas Couchbase Server would typically be in your data center, is going to be sequestered away, locked up behind your firewalls and everything. And so you need some edge device at the edge of your network to give access to the mobile devices. And that's Sync Gateway. And then we have on the client, we have the embedded Couchbase Lite database. What I want to emphasize here is that Couchbase Lite is a fully functional database that can be used as a substitute for typically a lot of people are used to using relational databases that come on like Android or iOS. But Couchbase Lite can act as it's a NoSQL document-oriented database, just like Couchbase Server, that can run completely standalone independently as a substitute for your database on device. Or it can be combined with Sync Gateway and Couchbase Server to have a cross-device and synchronization to your backend server there. And in fact, today we're going to be diving a bit deeper into Couchbase Lite in particular. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. So we just had our release of our version 2.1 of Couchbase Lite. Couchbase Lite, if you've ever looked at it before, we actually just did a major, with the 2X series, we just did a pretty major rewrite of things to simplify the API for it. But one of the things that I'm most excited about actually is the dynamic query capabilities that we've added. So we've actually modeled this on the Couchbase Server Nickel language. So Nickel, as we'll see in a few minutes directly, Nickel is actually a superset of SQL. So that might sound funny, is that we're talking about a NoSQL database that actually, when we take a look at our queries, you'll see look like are really, as I said, is a superset of SQL. So it'll be exactly SQL syntax. And then on top of that, we also have added full text search capabilities. There's ability to for eventing replicas. So very important on something potentially to have a backup on the device so you can actually replicate data there. And then in 2.1 in particular, one of the coolest features we've added is this peer-to-peer capability. So all of this is really oriented at being able to have data available offline, have the responsiveness of and flexibility of a NoSQL JSON a document database on the device. So you'll have your data local to your device for your application to be using. So when you're offline or with poor network connectivity, you're not hung up on REST calls and things like this. But also what the peer-to-peer part makes possible is replication from device, straight from device to device, instead of having to go up through Sync Gateway to do cross-device replication. So that gives you even more flexibility in the offline scenarios where you don't even need a network available at all to be syncing across devices. I mentioned that our query capability and the changes to it in the 2X series. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into that. So here, we have a pretty straightforward SQL statement in the upper part. Oops, I just lost that. And we can see how in the Java piece, so we have a select statement. We're just selecting all the information out of a document from a data source. And we've got some qualifiers on here where we're looking at the description. So that's actually a full text search query. And then a couple other things like size and color. So these are all fields in your document. And so we see how that maps below into our new interface for so Java being used for Android. And you can look through this flow. So you have the query builder. It's a Fluent style builder kind of interface. And you can just see how it follows directly where you have your select. And we'll see some details about the select. The select statement isn't actually quite right the way it is there. And then you provide the data source. So this is tracking exactly how we see the SQL query above. And then we have our qualifiers on the data following that. So, and you can, I think this is actually really straightforward to read, looking at the property type equal to the catalog, and the description and all these expressions for filtering out your results, and then also the order by expression. So you can see this is really kind of the full Monty, as they say, of the query capabilities that you're used to from SQL. So with that introduction, I'm going to go ahead and move us over to taking a look at the sample application that I wrote. So let's bring this up. So I wrote this sample using a Zebra TC56 device. So as Darren mentioned, this is Android-based device. It's really a very nice, solid, ruggedized phone, in effect, with the scanner built in and some extra hardware keys that you wouldn't be used to on a device, but quite nice. So what I'm showing here is I've actually got the device plugged into, and I'll be using the physical device, but I'm mirroring it to my screen here, so you'll be seeing what's on the device mirrored to the screen here. And what I've done is I've loaded the application, but I purposely didn't preload the database. So right now I have no data in the application. And what I'd like to show is I've set up a soft scan trigger key here, and over to the left here I have a set of barcodes. So what this application is it's sort of a simple version of what might be an inventory scanning app, and it's focused around books. And so what I have here are a bunch of ISBN barcodes like you might find on the cover of a set of books. And these are all books that I just made up. They're not real books, but and so what we'll see now is I'm going to go ahead and scan some of these barcodes just to show that the ISBN number is showing up. But as I mentioned, I don't have the data in place yet. So we'll see as I scan through some of these that the barcode is changing, but I'm not getting any other results in. So let's go ahead and move over. I mentioned that we have the 3 tiers there. So what's missing here is I have the data loaded in Couchbase Server. What I haven't done is fired up Sync Gateway to synchronize the data to the device. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then we can see there the synchronization happening. So now if I go back in and I scan things, now we get the book showing up. And just to give a sample across that, and I have this one left here just to illustrate that I've left one record out, purposely to show that we're still getting the error in there. Now, I actually set this up. I'm going to do this in reverse, or a little bit differently. So let's say here I had the author. Notice I left out the author over here, and I'd actually intended to leave out the author over here because I'm going to illustrate updates with this. But I'll go ahead and do it a different way. Let's just say that I've noticed that the author here is spelled incorrectly or something. So now I'm going to flip over to Couchbase Server. So this is the Couchbase Server Administrative Console. There's all sorts of features here, dashboards for monitoring, getting server information, all of that set up. I'm not going to walk through all of that. Instead, what I've got us focused on here is what we call our query workbench. So the query workbench allows you to run queries directly, so you can examine the data, you can manipulate the data from here. And just to illustrate that, I'm going to go ahead and run this query. So that was the last book that I took a look at. And you can see kind of the structure here, and you might notice some of these things like the attachments in here. So this is actually the thumbnail image of the book cover is included as a binary object in the database here. And then I have the author and such. Now I'm going to go through and actually let's just go through. I think we have time to walk through all the steps. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove the author field there, and let's flip back. So now if I rescan that book, we see the author is missing. So what we just saw there, just to drive home the point, is I made an update on Couchbase Server, and you saw it reflected as quickly as I could flip back over to the application. You saw the update reflected on the application because it was synchronized through Sync Gateway to the device. And then I'm just going to go ahead and add the author back in. And redo that. And there we have the author back. So that gives us the context, I think gives the idea and the context behind what the application is that we're going to walk through. So now we're going to get to the meaty part where we take a look at the code here. Actually, last thing before, again, I just want to emphasize that I wish I could illustrate this better in this kind of format, but it's pretty difficult to do, is that now I could take this device offline, be completely away from any network connectivity, and I'm getting that kind of responsiveness that you just saw with the scans because I have even the image file as part of my on-device database that I'm using. So no more REST calls, no more spinners, showing the user that it's waiting for something. Gives you a much nicer offline user experience. So let's go take a look at the code now. So I have up here, I wrote this. This is an Android application. So I've got the Android Studio IDE up here. For those of you that are familiar with Android development already, I wrote this as just a single activity. So I've packed everything, all the code into this one activity. This isn't how I would normally write an application for production, but for illustration purposes here, I think this makes it nice to walk through. And so starting at the top here, I did use, as Darryn mentioned, the DataWedge. I use DataWedge purely with intents, both to trigger scanning and to receive the data back. And so what you see up here at the top are my fixed strings that I need to use to fill the intents for those purposes. So let's move down from that to this onCreate method. excuse me, throat always gets a little dry while talking for a bit. For people who aren't familiar with Android development, onCreate is a callback that's called by the system. That's usually where a lot of the heavier lifting of setting up your application happens. And so, as I mentioned, I wouldn't normally, so at the beginning here we have just some UI work. And then I wouldn't normally put the database work in here, but for illustration, I chose to do it this way. And so let's start with this code here. So these first two lines that you see, this is all that it takes to open up the database on the device. So if I only care to be using the database without the synchronization capability, this is actually all I need to get started and have the database ready for use. I'm just using default configuration. That's usually good for most purposes. And then I've named my database inventory. So you can actually have multiple separate databases on the device, just all with unique names. Moving on from that, now I'm going to set up the synchronization, or sometimes we refer to it as a replication, data replication. And so what you see over here, this is the URL for my Sync Gateway device. So I'm actually running Sync Gateway. I'm running all of this actually on my laptop here. And so I've got Sync Gateway up and running, and I have to specify the URL for that. And then I'm going to create my replication configuration. I'll supply the database that I'm trying to replicate, that endpoint for Sync Gateway. And then I'm going to set up what we call a push-pull replication. So this is a bidirectional replication. You can actually have unidirectional replication. So I could set it up so if I wanted, say, data to be only pulled down from Couchbase server, for instance, I didn't want people to be able to modify data on the device and send it back, I could just set it up as a pull replication only. In this case, I'm setting it up bidirectional, so that means changes on Couchbase server will be reflected back down to the device. I could set it up so that if I made any changes on the device, they would get then sent back up and shared not only to the backend Couchbase server, but of course, as we've mentioned, this enables synchronization across multiple devices as well. So for our inventory thing, that could be really cool, where somebody, as they were scanning things, they noticed some problem, they could correct it right there, push it back up, and it could be pushed out to and update the database for every device that's using it. For security, I'm just using basic authentication and simple user password. And then this is another key piece, is setting this to a continuous replication. So you have, in that way, two types of replication. You can do what we call a one-shot replication. So that's something where you simply replicate data and then the replication shuts down and doesn't keep going updating things. So that might be something you'd use to do like an initial population of the database. But most commonly, people are running continuous replications, and so that's going to be essentially it's monitoring the network state of the device, and so it can tell whenever the device has network connectivity, and is going to then be constantly monitoring for any updates, pushing updates up from the device or pulling updates down from the external sources. So with that replicator configuration in hand, I go ahead and create my replicator object, and then I start that. And so once I've started that, that's just going to be running in the background. I don't have to worry about it anymore. It's going to be sitting there synchronizing data for me. Moving on from that, we saw I had the soft scan button that I created to trigger the scanning with Zebra and DataWedge. And so this is just setting up that action with, and I'm mentioning again that this is purely an intent-driven system. So I really like this about, I was really actually quite impressed with what Zebra has done here. This was super easy to set up and use. The code is very straightforward. All I'm doing here, I'm setting up an action so that this is targeted to the Zebra service. And then here it's the command that I want to send here. I want to toggle the scanning to turn it on. And then I simply send that as a broadcast out. And then the Android platform handles delivering that to the Zebra service. And scanning just gets turned on. And then next part is when I've actually captured my data, my barcode. It gets returned to me, and so the way I've set it up is I actually use as Darryn mentioned, I use the system where it uses the start activity method, and what happens with that is that delivers back to me the data in a new intent, so I have to go ahead and save that. There, and then this is all progressing through the life cycle. That's standard Android lifecycle stuff. So what happens is when DataWedge sends that intent back to my activity, first it'll get captured here, and then it will call. This is another one of the core activities in or core callbacks in Android is this onResume activity, or excuse me, callback. And so that's going to get called automatically by the system next. I'll pull the data out of that new intent. So this would grab the data from the intent for, so I just started up the application, or from the intent delivered by the scan. So I'll grab the information out of that. This first line here, so sorry, just to go back and emphasize it, as far as the Zebra interaction went, that was all, you're essentially seeing it in these lines right here. And that's all there is to it. So once I have that data back, I'm just doing a simple validation here to make sure that I got back the kind of information I was expecting. So I'm checking my label type to make sure this is an ISBN barcode scan. Assuming that checks out properly, I'll go ahead and get the actual barcode information, the ISBN number, out of the intent. I'm going to save that and go ahead and set that. This is a little UI piece right here where I'm going to go ahead and set the ISBN number directly based on the scan. And then I'm going to go in to populate the rest of the information about the book. So I've actually used, I don't want to be running this for, again, if you're used to Android development or just mobile development, you typically don't want to be running things on the thread that's doing the UI work. So I used RxJava to put things on the background thread. So you don't really need to worry about what's going on here. All that you might want to know is that what it's setting up to do is to run all of this work on a background thread, not on the UI thread. And so this is where I'm going to go ahead and set up my query. So I've got that query builder interface, and here we're flowing through. It's going to be just like a SQL thing where I'm doing my first part is my select statement to look at what information I want to get out. I'm using the select all results to get the entire contents of a document. So again, backing up a little bit, I mentioned this is a document-oriented database for people who aren't fully familiar with it, what that is. And this is a JSON, we store in JSON format. So what this is typically you create an individual document. So each book in the database, all the information about the book is stored in one document. And so I'm asking to retrieve all the data from that document. And this comes back in JSON format, which is really nice because that conforms pretty directly to it translates very nicely. Instead of dealing with relational tables and trying to map that into the data structures that I'm used to in programming, JSON maps very directly to data structures that I use in programming. So I'm getting all that information back from my, just specifying the data source that I'm pulling this from. And then I have a very simple qualifier statement here. So where my ISBN property, so this is a property of a JSON property in that document, is this ISBN field, and where that equals to the ISBN data that I pulled in from that scan. So now that I've set up my query, I'll go ahead and execute that. And then I want to do a little bit of manipulation with the results that I'm getting back. So I actually just immediately put that into a list. I move on and I do some simple checking. So I'm scanning books. So my expectation is that just a couple possibilities here is that I'm either going to have no result, which means that my book isn't in my database. And so in that case, I want to put up that missing warning that you saw. I could have potentially more than one result come back, which would be not expected, but I'm just putting in a check for that. And so I want to warn about there being a duplicate entry in that case. So that's just some simple error handling. But what we really expect is to just get a single result back. And so that's the core case here that I'm going to walk through. And so here we see I've got my result object. I'm just going ahead and grabbing, that would come back as I put that into a list. And so I'm just getting the first element out of that list. And then I'm turning that, pulling out that into a dictionary. A dictionary is the Couchbase class here, but it's really just a map, but it's a immutable map. So you can't directly alter the contents of the dictionary, but I do actually want to alter the contents, and we'll talk about why in a second here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that dictionary directly into a Java hash map. And the reason I want to do that is now I'm going to show, I wanted to show off that attachment capability. So what I do now here is I'm going to go ahead and get the cover image that I stored as a binary attachment to my document. And I'll set that up. And this is essentially all of the code. I won't go into the details here, to create a bitmap from that binary data. So this is giving me my thumbnail that I want to display to show the book, with the idea that somebody can quickly validate that they're actually looking at the book that they're expecting or something like that. And then I'll add that thumbnail to the document. And then the rest of this code effectively spits that information out. And then down here, you can see this call into this display. And this is all just UI stuff, so I'm not going to go into it. But that's all there is to doing our query, getting back our information, and then populating the display on the application that we saw before. And so you can see, hopefully this was written in a way to allow kind of a logical walkthrough that you could follow easily. But you can see that was all really straightforward. And that's actually it for the code walkthrough. I'm going to flip us back over. As we mentioned before, This code is actually all available up here in the GitHub repository. We have this address and some other information. Actually, I'll flip back to the presentation now. And let's take a look at some of the resources that we have. Actually, I think I'm going to hand this back to Dan. I think you were going to walk through this part. So
sure. Can you keep sharing your screen and I'll just talk through it?
Okay, sure, yeah. So there we go.
Great. So yeah, we had a few slides here with some helpful resources, because we were able to cover quite a bit in this talk. So first we had this slide here on Zebra DataWedge. So this is a lot of the content that Darryn went through. So Darryn, is there anything you wanted to add, just highlighting this information?
No, I mean the API sample, I showed a screenshot of that in the slides earlier on. If you just want something to get started using either Xamarin or Android to interface with DataWedge through the intents, then there's a couple of tutorials there, one for Android, one for Xamarin. The full listing of the APIs that I spoke about and that Hod used are available at the link three bullets down, and then there's some other articles as well that may be useful for people more advanced DataWedge topics.
Excellent. And Hod, can you go to the next slide?
Yeah, so I guess I can comment on this. So just similar sets of resources, pointers to resources for Couchbase. We have our documentation developer portal. We also have quite a few sample and community projects up on our Couchbase labs. So there's Couchbase is the official repo for Couchbase is open source. So the official repo for the supported projects. So like the core Couchbase, the database itself, and the SDKs and other things like that are on Couchbase. And then Couchbase Labs are for unofficial projects and community contributed projects. Then we have the demo project. That's the link for that. That's on my personal GitHub. One other thing I wanted to mention actually briefly is that Couchbase is having our Couchbase Connect conference that's happening just next week in San Jose. So there's still time to get passes for that. Come visit. I'll be there at the conference. Would love to meet anyone who wants to come by and say hi. And talk about any of this. And yeah, I think that's it. So just going to the next thing, I guess we'll move over to questions now.
Excellent. Thanks, Hod. So just a reminder to everyone, we are going to take these slides and post them to the Zebra developer portal at developer.zebra.com. So you'll be able to find that. We also have recorded this presentation, and in the next week or so, we'll have that up on Zebra's YouTube channel. If you do have any questions, you can type those into the question box as part of GoToWebinar. See, so Hod, we do have a couple questions that are just kind of, I would say, more some basics around Couchbase. So the first question that came in was, is Couchbase Lite free of charge?
So Couchbase Lite is, well, let me talk about the sort of the model, the business model for Couchbase overall. So Couchbase and Couchbase Lite, including Couchbase Lite, actually the whole mobile stack and Couchbase Server is open source, or really I refer to it as open core. So what that means is that the main databases are open source. There's some tooling and some add-on pieces that are what we call enterprise only, and some of those are closed source. And so our main model is an enterprise versus community edition sort of thing, where with the enterprise edition of something, actually our licensing is really nice. So what happens is with the enterprise edition of things, you can use the enterprise edition for everything, for all your development, all your testing, everything right up to deployment. And we only ask that you license Enterprise Edition when you go into production, when you actually deploy out. And so Couchbase Lite, there's actually there's really at this point no difference between the Community Edition and the Enterprise Edition. There is with Couchbase Server. The way it works with Couchbase Server is typically the Community Edition lags a little bit behind in features. So it's like as we update Couchbase, we kind of advance to Enterprise, and then usually Community Edition is kind of catching up with the feature set to slightly older versions of Couchbase. With mobile, that actually right now they're pretty much in sync. There is one piece that's an enterprise only, and that is something that the Sync Gateway Accelerator, and that's something that's really that you need when you get to large scaling. So it's typically, you know, if you're scaling to the size where you need that piece, then you won't mind paying us for it.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Had. So we did have another question, which was about some of the deployments. So there's a customer, if you know, a type of scenario where a customer may have a SQL database server. Can they use a NoSQL database on a mobile device to be able to sync? Or are they not compatible to kind of go back and forth like that?
So not directly, yeah. So the synchronization, because it relies on something called the data change protocol that's used in Couchbase, it actually underlies a lot of the Couchbase technology, is part of what makes it so powerful. The synchronization only works through Sync Gateway with Couchbase Server. So in order to integrate it with a relational system, you'd have to have some kind of way of transferring between, and that's actually a really common case, what people refer to as kind of mixed mode environments. This is actually a really common thing that we're seeing these days, where people use a mix of different database technologies on the back end.
So is then that, I think you said a translator, is that, since you said it's a common use case, are there a lot of tools that Couchbase has to facilitate and make that process easier? And I'm asking because we actually had 3 questions all about this topic. So
that's something that does come up, and we don't. And the reason we don't is that mapping from a relational database to a NoSQL database, a document-oriented database, it's not at all straightforward. There's kind of no standard way to do it. It's too specific typically to how you want to model your data. So it's not that it's necessarily really difficult to model the data or anything like that. It's just that the way to do it is something that you can't really automate very well.
Okay. All right. So it's definitely something a lot of your customers are doing. There's just not a kind of standard template on how to do it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Let's see. Those were all the questions that we had right now. So again, we are going to have these slides posted online as well as a recording of the webinar. So Had, I wanted to give a big thank you to you. This was a really helpful overview for us and for our developer community to understand Couchbase better and how your products can really help them because, you know, a lot of our software companies, a big part of what they do is this database access. So this was a great overview. Thank you.
Well, thank you. This has been a really enjoyable project for me, and getting introduced to Zebra and getting to try out one of your devices and everything has been really quite interesting.
All right, fantastic. So that's going to wrap it up for today. So thank you, everyone, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month. All right.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.